Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit.
Hey, you citizens of the world, welcome back to Live from the Heartland for the week of November 28th. And each month we have our good friend Paul Draus come on. He is our Michigan guy these days. And he is a former host of Live from the Heartland show. He's a sociology professor at the University of Michigan in Dearborn. He's the author of a couple of books, and he's someone that I really like to hear from. And I asked him, and he proposed, this time we talk about progressive mayors, thinking about progressive mayors, the promises, the pitfalls in the wake of the great Mamdani win in New York. So good day to you, Paul.
Hey, Mike. Great to see you.
Good to see you.
Thanksgiving.
So tell us a little bit about what led you to want to talk about progressive mayors. I did go on to Google and do progressive mayors, and I got a list from James Kenney of Philadelphia, Randall Wolfen of Birmingham, Quentin Lewis of Kansas City, and then we've got Mayor Johnson here in Chicago, and you've got more on the list. What do you want to talk about?
Yeah, well, I think what got me thinking about it was with the election of Zohran Mamdani, and it was with and the incredible campaign that he ran, coming from basically out of nowhere to winning a decisive victory, not only in a primary but then in a contested election. Winning over 50% of the vote with record turnout and generating a lot of excitement, both because of his sort of personality, but also because of his ideas, and proclaiming himself publicly as a democratic socialist. I think this has raised a lot of hopes for a lot of people, but I think it also raises a lot of interesting questions, because if you're a progressive democratic socialist, usually you don't win. And so you don't actually have necessarily the opportunity to test your policies or your ideas against the political reality that you confront, especially in a place like New York City. And I've lived in New York City. It's an incredible place, but it's a huge place. And as some of the formerly conservative but now anti-Trump, pro-democracy, former Republicans, have commented, there is no Department of Income Redistribution in the city of New York. You've got to deal with, he has this great proposal about free buses, which I think would actually be fantastic. I think if we could just make buses better and a better service for everybody and cheaper, I think actually all cities would benefit. I think that's actually a fantastic idea. But again, now is the test if he can actually achieve some of these things and also keep his sort of progressive bona fides, because, sometimes you have to give up certain things, or you have to trade off certain things, because that's what actual governing politics is all about. It's about making compromises and sometimes trading one thing off for another thing. And so to me, that raises a lot of interesting questions. And I think we have other people that we can look at. And so here, as I live in Michigan and living, next to Detroit and in Dearborn, Michigan, my own city, we have our own kind of Zohran Mamdani here, who was elected at age 31. His name is Abdullah Hamid. He was a progressive state senator, avowedly progressive, with a master's in public health and a master's in business administration from the University of Michigan. He was reelected the same day that Zohran Mamdani was elected in New York City. And so
there were a lot of progressives who got elected in this last election at all levels.
Yeah. So, but also some people that would not be necessarily considered progressive, Mikey Sherrill and Abigail Spanberger in
Big Tent.
In Virginia and in New Jersey. So I think what makes, Abdullah Hamid an interesting kind of point of, not necessarily a point of contrast, but maybe a kind of a model for thinking about Mamdani, is that he was reelected with a very high margin. He's very popular. He's not stood down from any of his progressive ideas, but he has also embraced kind of the idea of being a mayor as being someone that works with everybody and gets into the weeds with problems, right? And to me, I think that's what makes mayors really successful. So that to me is a really interesting question about Mamdani. Does he also have, he has a relish for the fight. He has a relish for the ideas. Does he also have a relish for the day-to-day work of trying to solve city problems and getting into the nuts and bolts? Because I think that's what the really great mayors do, whether you like them or not, whether they're progressive or moderate. I think Richie Daley, I never liked Richie Daley, but I actually thought that he was actually pretty effective as a mayor in a lot of ways. Because he had a certain enjoyment of that process of how do you make the numbers add up? How do you make deals happen? All that kind of stuff. So I think that kind of raises a lot of interesting questions for me. And then Brandon Johnson, I'm watching sort of from afar, no longer living in Chicago, how he's doing, because he was also someone that came in with a lot of progressive ideas. My sense is that he's struggled a bit more. Although I found his statements on ICE, I've really enjoyed. I've thought that he's been very, very strong on responding to the deployment of National Guard troops and ICE agents to Chicago. But in terms of the nuts and bolts stuff, I've heard that he's struggled a lot more.
Yeah, I think he's opening up, though. I think I found him. Like a lot of progressives, we worked hard to get him elected, and then we weren't real happy with how he'd been carrying out his duties in office. But I think that the ICE raids, came after all the migrants and the immigrants coming from Venezuela, which caused him some, problems in the public view about how that got handled. But I think during ICE, he's really been great. And I'm hoping he makes a kind of a comeback, because the last thing I want to have to do is get involved in another mayoral race to keep out, the more conservative Democrats.
Well, I found out your former mayor is working with a colleague of mine on doing some kind of public policy clinic. He's a professor at U of M in Ann Arbor, and Lori Lightfoot has been co-teaching a class with him on public policy. So she's remaining active. I'm happy to hear. And she was also elected, I think, as a progressive.
She screwed up. I think I like Lori a lot, but she just, as a mayor, she didn't seem to come through. So one of the things that we talked about before we got on the air was what kind of inspired you a little bit was the sewer socialists of Milwaukee. We have about 5 minutes. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the sewer socialists and what we might learn from them?
Well, so thinking about this question, both here in Michigan and and with Mamdani in New York, talking with some of my friends, my colleagues here, I brought up the example of the sewer socialists in Milwaukee. So this was a kind of a name given to a set of people that were in political power in Milwaukee from around 1900 to 1960, off and on, right? So they were representative.
1916 or 60.
60, yeah. They had a socialist mayor from 1948 until 1960. Actually, until Mamdani's election, he was the last big city socialist mayor ever elected in the U.S. But the reason they were called sewer socialists, now this is, I think, where there's a lesson to learn, is that they focused a lot on, as opposed to sort of, overthrowing capitalism or, tearing down the system, they focused on reforming the excesses of the system, especially by investing in public goods in the city of Milwaukee. And the sewers was one thing, the parks, public sanitation, public services that everybody liked, right? So people, regardless of whether they consider themselves socialists or not, they appreciated these services and they appreciated the benefits they brought to the city. And the sewer socialists were popular for that reason, right? That they were able to take on the kind of the bread and butter, nuts and bolts stuff and invest in things that benefited everybody, as opposed to engaging just in ideological battles. And I think you see that a little bit with Mamdani already with this meeting with Trump, which I know you probably wanted to say something about, where it seems like he's taking a practical, like he's making, he's bringing his charm to bear on a guy who is obviously susceptible to personal charm and trying to make it work for his city. So what did you think about that?
We talked about it earlier with Mike Klonsky in the first segment, and also we did use this quote from Michelle Wu, the mayor of Boston, who was pretty critical. She didn't say it by name, but she said, "I am fighting hard as possible can to stop the actions of federal government that seems intent on attacking its own people." And she also didn't think that she kind of was not where Mondami was at. She wasn't going to talk to Trump. Let me ask you one other thing before we run out of time. You have a new mayor in Detroit, and we're used to in Detroit having a guy like Coleman who was there for many years, and then I don't know where it's been. But what's the situation with your new mayor?
So the new mayor just elected, the same day that, Abdullah was reelected and Zoran was elected. Mary Sheffield was elected the first woman mayor of Detroit. It's an African-American woman. She's a lifelong Detroit resident. She comes from actually a family of activist pastors. Her father and grandfather were both pastors in Detroit, very active in the civil rights movement. She was the president of the city council for a number of years, I think for probably the last 6 to 8 years. I don't know a lot about her, except, what I hear from others and what I've heard her say. She has progressive values, but I've also heard others basically say she's more or less like a basically standard Democrat. She's succeeding Mike Duggan, who was the first white mayor in Detroit since Coleman Young was elected. And he actually, had a very, successful, I guess you'd say 3 terms as mayor in the sense of he was always reelected. He achieved a lot of things. Now he's running for governor. So in some ways, this is kind of like a passing the baton. I think it raises some interesting questions for Sheffield because she's been the city council president. And as some have said, that gave her the ability to say, take credit for things good that were happening in the city, good things that people liked. But if things happened that people didn't like, she could always say it was the mayor, right? And now as the mayor, of course, the buck will stop with her. But I mean, I know a lot of people who've gotten behind Sheffield. She won by a significant margin. I think she got like 70% of the vote in the election. And so I think it'll be really interesting to watch what she does. She has been a great voice for economic inequality and redistributing gains across the city and across all the different neighborhoods, some of which have been left out by the current redevelopment taking place in Detroit. So this will be a good test also for her to see what she can accomplish in terms of achieving those values. It's good talking to you, and we're rooting for all these progressive mayors. And once again, anyone wants to just go to Google and look up progressive mayors. There's a bunch of people, and probably more than we even know about. And running a big city under a regime like this is going to be rough for everybody. So we're hoping for the best, and we do what we have to do to get by for a better day. We'll see. Some of the best ideas and some of our best hope comes out of our city. So I think that's also important to remember. Hey, you keep up the good work, Paul. We'll see you next month. And tell us the name of your 2 books real quick. The first one is called Consumed in the City, 2004, and then Forging Identity came out this year in 2025. I'm right now finishing up another book, will be about Detroit. Hopefully it'll come out next year. So, right on, brother. Keep up the good work.